In today's video, I'll be telling you about two horrifying bear encounters of an Antarctic team with a man who goes camping alone. Find out if they survive the odds. Alex had always been fascinated by the idea of travelling to Antarctica. He was a thrill seeker and loved the idea of exploring the vast and desolate landscapes of the frozen continent. So when he got the opportunity to join a group of scientists on a research trip to Antarctica, he jumped at the chance. The trip started off smoothly, with Alex and the team setting up for camp on the snowy mountains of Antarctica. The atmosphere was amazing and peaceful, with the only sound being the gentle howling of the wind. The team spent their days studying the unique wildlife and taking in the breathtaking scenery. But as the days went by, Alex started to feel a sense of unease. He couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. He dismissed it as his imagination, attributing it to the isolation and extreme conditions of their surroundings. One evening, as the team sat around the campfire, they heard a loud roar echoing through the mountains. It sounded like a deep growl, unlike anything they had heard before. The scientists brushed it off as a distant storm and continued their work. But Alex couldn't shake off the feeling of the dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't help but wonder what could be out there, lurking in the darkness. The next day, as the team set out to explore a nearby glacier, they came across a set of large paw prints in the snow. The prints were too big to belong to any animal they were familiar with. As they followed the tracks, they noticed that they had led to a cave hidden behind a large boulder. The team cautiously approached the cave, their hearts racing with excitement and fear. They cautiously stepped inside, their flashlights illuminating the dark and eerie space. As they explored further, they came across a large polar bear, its eyes fixed on them. The team quickly retreated, their hearts pounding in their chest. They had heard stories about polar bears being aggressive and unpredictable, and they knew they had to be careful. The bear seemed to be following them, its heavy footsteps echoing through the cave. As they made their way back to camp, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being stalked by the bear. They decided to pack up and leave the area, not wanting to take any chances. But as they were about to leave, they realised that one of their team members, Emily, was missing. They searched the area frantically, calling out her name, but there was no sign of her. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the direction of the cave. Without hesitation, Alex and a few others rushed towards the cave, their hearts racing with fear. As they entered the cave, they saw Emily lying on the ground, her body covered in blood. The polar bear was standing over her, its jaws dripping with blood. Alex and the team quickly grabbed their weapons and tried to scare off the bear, but it was too late. The bear charged towards them, its eyes filled with rage. In a panic, the team ran out of the cave, narrowly escaping the ferocious animal. They quickly made their way back to the camp, shaken and traumatized by the horrific encounter. As they gathered around the campfire, trying to make sense of what just happened, they heard another roar coming from a distance. This time, it was louder and more menacing. The team knew that they had to leave immediately. They packed their belongings and started their journey back to the civilization, constantly looking over their shoulders, fearing that the polar bear was still following them. As they made their way through the snowy mountains, they could hear the polar bear's roar, getting closer and closer. The team was exhausted and terrified, but they knew they had to keep moving if they wanted to survive. Just as they were about to reach the helicopter, the polar bear appeared in front of them, blocking their path. The team was frozen with fear, not knowing what to do. But Alex, fueled with adrenaline and determination, grabbed a nearby flare gun and fired it at the polar bear. The loud bang and the bright lights scared off the bear, giving them enough time to make a run for the helicopter. They quickly boarded the helicopter and flew away, leaving behind the terrifying memories of their encounter with the bear. As they flew back to civilization, Alex couldn't help but think about how his dream trip to Antarctica had turned into a nightmare. He had always been fascinated by the idea of exploring the unknown, but he never imagined that it would lead to a life-threatening encounter with a ferocious bear. From that day on, Alex never looked at polar bears the same way. He had learnt the hard way that sometimes the most beautiful and serene places can hold the most terrifying and deadly secrets. From that day on, Alex never looked at polar bears the same way. He had learnt the hard way that sometimes the most beautiful and scenic places can hold the most terrifying and deadly secrets. Steve had always been fascinated by the outdoors. He loved nothing more than spending his weekends hiking through the dense forests surrounding his small community. Fresh air, the sound of nature, the feeling of being disconnected from a busy world were all the reasons why he found happiness in the wilderness. One weekend, Steve decided to venture out further than he ever had before. He had heard rumours of a remote location deep within the forest that was said to be the most beautiful spot in the entire area. He couldn't resist the temptation and set off his journey early Saturday morning. As he made his way through the thick trees and overgrown bushes, Steve couldn't help but feel a sense of discomfort. The further he went, the more atmosphere seemed to change. The once peaceful and serene forest now felt dark and foreboding, but Steve shrugged off his unease, thinking it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. After hours of hiking, Steve finally reached the remote location, and he was not disappointed. The view was breathtaking. He could see for miles, and the sun was just beginning to set. Casting a warm glow over the landscape, Steve decided to set up camp for the night, taking the beauty of his surroundings. As the night fell, Steve sat by his campfire, roasting marshmallows and enjoying the peacefulness of the forest. But as he began to drift to sleep, he heard rustling in the bushes nearby. He quickly grabbed his flashlight and pointed out the direction of the noise, but there was nothing there. Steve brushed it off as an animal and settled back into his sleeping bag. However, throughout the night, Steve was awoken several times by strange noises and the feeling of being watched. Each time he checked, there was nothing there, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Next morning, Steve packed up his camp and began his journey back home. But as he made his way through the forest, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being followed. He quickened his pace, but the rustling in the bushes seemed to be getting closer and closer. Suddenly, Steve heard a loud growl coming from behind him. He turned around to see a large, menacing black bear standing just a few feet away. Steve's heart raced and thoughts went through his head at what could happen next, but the bear attacked in the forest. He slowly began to back away, but the bear was not backing down. In a panic, Steve reached for his backpack, hoping to find something to defend himself with. But as he rummaged through his bag, he realised he left his knife back at his campsite. He was defenceless. The bear let out another loud growl and began to charge towards Steve. In a split second, Steve made a decision that would change his life forever. He turned around and ran as fast as he could, hoping to outrun the bear. But the bear was faster, and it quickly caught up to him. Steve could feel the bear's hot breath on his neck as it lunged towards him. He closed his eyes, bracing for impact, but instead, he felt a sharp pain in his leg. The bear had bitten down on his calf, and Steve could feel its teeth sinking deeper into his flesh. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Steve fought back, punching and kicking at the bear, but it was no use. The bear was too strong, and Steve could feel its energy draining away. He knew he was no match for the powerful animal. Just when he thought it was all over, Steve had heard a loud gunshot and the bear fell to the ground lifeless. He looked up to see a group of hunters emerging from the trees. They had been tracking the bear and have arrived just in time to save Steve's life. Steve was rushed to the nearest hospital, where he spent weeks recovering from his injuries, but the physical wounds were nothing compared to the mental trauma he had endured. The bear attack had left him with a deep fear of the forest and a constant feeling of being watched. He never returned to the remote location and stopped going on his weekend hikes altogether. For once adventurous and fearless Steve was now a shell of his former self, haunted by the horrors he had experienced in the forest. The small community was in shock when they heard of a bear attack, and many were afraid to venture into the forest. Rumors began to spread about a cursed location deep in the woods, where a vengeful bear roamed, waiting to attack anyone who dared to enter its territory. Steve never spoke of his encounter with the bear, but he knew the truth. It wasn't a cursed location or a vengeful bear. It was the feeling of being watched, the strange noises in the night, and the sense of unease that he had felt before the attack. The forest was not the peaceful and serene place he had once thought it to be. It was a place of horror, and Steve would never forget the terror he had faced there. Thanks for watching, subscribe for weekly content.